told you something failed 70% of the time, you'd be thinking, who's getting fired? But 70% is the real number of how many transformations fail. That's a lot, right? Incredible in not such a great way. So let's talk about what we need to be doing to not be part of that 70%. Let's get into it. I'm Sarah Wilson, a fractional COO and turnaround partner for SMB. I help scaling companies unlock growth with the great teams and tools they already have. I work with founders to install scalable, repeatable processes that turn ambition into execution. So the question I want to sit with today is, why is transformation failing so much? Does it have to be this hard? So that's what we're getting into today. I want to give you a framework of how we think about change within our organizations today and how we should really be thinking about it. First, let's get into the numbers. McKinsey has been studying transformation for the last 15 years, and their consistent finding was where that 70% came from. 70% of transformations are failing. Not 30, not 40, 70. ProSci, which is probably the most widely recognized research body specifically around change management, also backs that up. And the research from them matches that 70% as well. That's 70% of initiatives not reaching their intended income. Their research shows the same figure. Over 70% of initiatives don't reach their intended outcome. Here's another number to think about. ProSci's research also shows that projects with proper change management protocols in place are 7 times more likely to succeed than ones that don't. So proper change management works when we use it. So the question isn't about how easy or hard change is. We all know that change is hard. It's hard for humans in general. Going from one state to another has never been simple. So it really comes down to how are we going to structure the work within our organizations and really think about transformation and how it's going to succeed in the way that our businesses work today. To be clear, I really believe in the change management model. It's just a matter of adapting it to how things are working within our companies today. The change management models we have today don't necessarily and weren't created during or updated for the pace, the cross-functional complexity, and how our companies run now. So here's a pattern that I have seen consistently. A leadership announces a major transformation that's on the roadmap. They bring in a change management plan, stakeholder analysis, communication cadence, training schedule, everything by the book. And we're ready to go, right? Wrong. 6 months later, adoption has stalled. Projects behind, and while people are saying all the right things in the meetings, we know that everybody is still going back to the old ways of working. Does this sound familiar in your business? Here's what I think is actually happening. Traditional change management was designed around the idea of one change at a time. Here's what I think is actually happening. Traditional change management models were designed for 1, maybe 2, 3 max changes at a time. You know, the really great framework in terms of ADKAR, for example, you identify impacted employees, you build awareness, you move through the stages through to knowledge, ability, and reinforcement, and then you change things and you sustain. All great things. But that model really is built for going through one change, stabilizing before you start the next one. And as you know, watching this video, that is not how our organizations work today. I see this consistently. Organizations are running 5, 8, sometimes upwards of 12 changes simultaneously. Now, with the word transformation, sometimes we mistake that as thinking something's rather large, but a change is a change. If your employees need to do something different tomorrow than they were yesterday, that is a transformation. I mean, it could be anything. You know, how the teams are compensated, leadership structure, training processes are updated, regulatory requirements have changed, sales process, even, of course, AI adoption. Big or small, we need to think about transformation as being the same thing as change, and we need to treat it as such each and every time. Now, here's a piece we don't necessarily talk about. We might think in our heads, but change saturation is key. People don't fail to absorb all of these changes because they're resistant necessarily. I see organizations running so many change initiatives all at once, 5, 8, sometimes 12 initiatives, ERP fixes, sales compensation restructures, org chart restructures, AI adoption. Big or small, companies are changing a ton all at once. And, our teams aren't necessarily failing at the change part because they're resistant. It's really coming down to change saturation. People can only absorb so much change at once before they just don't engage anymore. So I'd like to explain change capacity engineering, what that means and how it can help. The core idea is this: treat your organization like a load-bearing structure, like an engineer would. Measure the load, identify the saturation points, and sequence your change initiatives accordingly. So the first step to change engineering is to build the inventory, or build the list of inventory, if you will. Most organizations I've worked with don't have a full view of what's going on in each of their departments. They might have a strategic roadmap that everybody agreed to, at the beginning of the year, or maybe that 3-year plan, 3 to 5. But organizations rarely maintain a complete list of projects. Projects end up being, not large enough of a size that we think, oh, this is a transformation, so they don't get listed anywhere. I advocate for going through the process, through each department. What does each department have going on in terms of projects, change initiatives, things that are outside of the day-to-day processing of the work that gets done, i.e., the service you provide. Anything outside of that goes on the list. On that list, then, what you do is you go through and estimate the amount of change load, if you will, change resources that are needed, how many people, what is the level of change? Is it a small level? Is it a large level? And you can estimate that well when you think about how much training is going to be required to have the team use this going forward. Traditionally in change management, we have readiness surveys, and those are like pulse checks for the teams to do and to get a sense of how ready are they for the change that's coming. Well, in today's change engineering, that isn't enough. We actually need to go with what I call capacity dashboards. So it's time to take the change initiatives that you've listed, take the estimates that you have put to each one, and really map out in a dashboard format what that looks like within your organization as a whole. And you will identify within that framework where the red zones are, essentially where we potentially going to fail if we've lined up too many changes all at once. Now, I completely understand it. We are often on the clock. We are on the clock for results. We are trying to work fast to respond to the market. We are always, on a deadline, and it is completely normal to want to sequence everything very close together and to get going on things, if you will, really fast. I completely understand that as something we might default to, but I really encourage you to think about real success in your initiatives. That 70% number that we talked about is real, and we want to avoid that. So if that means, once we've built out the change engineering map, if you will, if that means that we have to move some initiatives around, you're going to end up more successful when you delay things to ensure that your teams aren't getting overloaded with change. And another thing to consider, change readiness typically asks how people are feeling about a change. What you're trying to measure when you think about change engineering is not if somebody agrees with or is happy about a change, but do they have the capacity to absorb it? And the third important piece about change engineering is, or to implement change engineering, is to map out the shadow operating system. You may have heard the term shadow system before. That's the work that happens outside of the official system of record. So, for example, if you have an ERP and that's where transactions happen, but you have team members who are maintaining documents or data pieces outside of the ERP because it's easier, or there's lots of really great business reasons why you've done that. Anything outside of the main system of record is considered a shadow system. I would encourage you to do the same kind of mapping to identify the shadow operating model. So like a shadow system, a shadow operating model is what happens outside of the typical org chart. So there is your org chart with the reporting lines, and then there's what actually happens, how decisions flow, where influence lives, who's aligned with whom, the politics, all of that is considered the shadow operating model. Anything, there's your org chart, and then there's what's really happening. Take the time to map out the what's really happening alongside of, what the change load looks like. And that will ensure that you are actively aligning your resources properly to ensure that your initiatives move forward, ensuring that you are mapping the change load across your initiatives, and then taking into account the shadow operating model will allow you to properly sequence your change within your organization. Now, another organizational capability I want to talk about is cross-functional translation. The other operational capability I want to talk about when it comes to initiatives and moving them to our success bucket is cross-functional translation. So one of the root causes of why things fail within an organization doesn't come down to competence. It comes down to communication, and not whether or not did we communicate. We all know on the surface that communication is important, and we can make whole videos on that, but it comes down to whether or not the people absorbing the message understood it. And sometimes people don't know what they don't know. I'm sure you've heard that before. When they took in your message, how did they understand it? And that is the key capability I want to talk about when we're talking about cross-functional translation. For example, leadership team articulates a vision. Depending on where people live in an organization, they're going to interpret it different. And of course, it's usually based on the function that they work in. Finance is going to hear one part, HR is going to hear another, operations is going to focus on another piece of the communication. So success really comes down to understanding that is just the way things work, and putting in a piece of translation to help smooth that out across your organization. So what does that mean? That means finding somebody within your organization that is good at translating. Everyone has one. It's often someone who's super technical. Isn't always, but it often is somebody who lives in the technical, kind of has a systems thinking mindset, and is the one you go to, who knows how to solve everything. The person who knows how to solve everything is often the person who got there by understanding everybody's function, if you will. For example, they will understand a change that's getting made. They'll understand what finance cares about. They'll understand what might come up in HR. They'll understand the questions that operations is going to ask even before they ask them. So find that person and utilize that person to help your organizational functions understand what's happening, and that the message is essentially being received as much as you can the same way across the functions. So finally, I want to leave you with a practical tool that you can take and use within your organization around change capacity. So the change capacity audit. To be transparent, I am a certified change manager. I hold my ACMP credentials, and I am a firm believer in robust change management principles. Absolutely. But I will be the first to say that sometimes we need to translate our methodologies into real life. Or said another way, our methodologies provide us with a really wonderful framework, but we always have to translate them into how business is actually done. So here's the practical starting point for doing a change audit. 5 questions. How many active change initiatives are currently going on in your organization? And remember to list everything. It's not just the big things we've labeled transformation, but it's even the little ways of changing the way we do business that we need to list. From there, which functions or teams are appearing the most when you think about mapping out those changes and who they're affecting for those parts of the organization that appear the most? Third question, does your change management approach sequence your changes the right way? Or do we need to look how those changes are being sequenced? Fourth part of the audit is going back to that piece about, does each function understand what's changing in operational terms? And then fifth is going back to that change. And fifth is going back to that shadow operating model. Again, what's really happening within your organization behind the scenes that will impact the change at hand. And there you have it. Those 5 questions let you perform a change audit on your initiatives and sets you up for success going forward. So there you have it. Change management is something close to my heart, and of course, something that's probably close to yours if you've been clicked on this video. But it's really time to ensure that our change management principles are tailored to the way that work happens today. So that's where change engineering comes in. Measure the load, sequence deliberately, and build translation as a default capacity, not an afterthought. If you found this video useful, I would love for you to subscribe. And tell me about the change management in your organizations down in the comments below. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.